Hello, Namaskar. This is Firstpost and you're watching Vantage with me, Palki Sharma. A new twist in the Russia-Ukraine war as both sides intensify attacks. President Zelensky has come up with a victory plan that he hopes to present next month in the US. It talks about the need for dialogue, but is it rooted in the reality of the battleground? We'll discuss that. In the Maldives, the president says there's a coup attempt underway. The opposition says the same, but they're both blaming different players. In Myanmar, China's top diplomat has landed to put pressure on the junta. The fighting is hurting Beijing's interests. They want a ceasefire, but will the generals agree? In Pakistan, a belated attempt to steady the economy with austerity measures, loans and moves to flatter China. In France, a political deadlock and no government in place 2 months after the election. We tell you why Macron is not picking a prime minister. In the Kolkata rape and murder case, violent protests and politics overshadow the real issues. In Kerala, more women speak up against abusers in the film industry. Some of them are prominent actresses who were silenced. How powerful does a woman have to be heard? Why has Mexico paused its relationship with the embassies of the US and Canada? What the first World Cup for esports says about the future of gaming, and loneliness is deadly. The world knows it. Why have we failed to fix it? All this and more coming up. The headlines first. Israel launches a major military operation in the West Bank. Its forces raid 4 cities, including Jenin. The operation involved airstrikes, ground forces and bulldozers. At least 10 Palestinians have been killed. Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas cut short his trip to Saudi Arabia to return to West Bank. Bangladesh lifts the ban on the country's largest Islamist party, the Jamaat-e-Islami. The ban was imposed in the final days of Sheikh Hasina's rule. The caretaker government has also freed Jashimuddin Rehmani. He is the chief of an Al-Qaeda-affiliated terrorist group. Turkey to join a meeting of the European Union in Brussels for the first time in 5 years. Ankara has been an EU candidate since 1999. It launched membership talks in the year 2005, but the process has been frozen for years. Turkey hopes Thursday's meeting will help reopen channels for dialogue. UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer meets German Chancellor Olaf Scholz in Berlin. This is Starmer's first bilateral trip since taking office last month. He will travel to France next. Britain's ties with its European allies have been damaged by Brexit, but Starmer has promised to rebuild the trust. And thousands without power in southern Australia. Strong winds topple trees and power lines. Almost 20,000 people affected by the power cuts. The state of Victoria has issued a severe weather warning. Parts of Melbourne have also been hit.
Думаю, справедливо, якщо я цей план представлю спочатку президенту Сполучених Штатів. Слава Україні!
Командир президентского полка, полковник Сурайкин.
Здравствуйте, товарищи!
Ukraine has unveiled a victory plan, an ambitious but vague agenda to end the war. President Zelensky announced it on Tuesday. It came after 2 days of relentless attacks by Russia. Moscow fired hundreds of missiles and drones. They targeted around 20 Ukrainian cities. Soon afterwards, Zelensky unveiled his plan. He will share it with US President Joe Biden.
Думаю, справедливо, якщо я
It will be fair to present this plan to the U.S. president. The success of this plan depends on him. Whether we will get what is in this plan or not, whether we will have freedom to use the things prescribed by the plan or not. Since things are generally delayed in life, I think I will present this plan in September during the meeting with him. I think it will be a right thing to do to convey this plan to both Kamala Harris and Trump.
І думаю, що якимось чином буде правильно.
Zelensky will be traveling to the US in the month of September. He will address the United Nations General Assembly. During that trip, he will share his victory plan, not just with Biden, but also Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. Now, what exactly is this plan? Zelensky has outlined 4 stages. Number 1, the Kursk incursion. Ukraine has made inroads into Russian territory. They claim to control 100 settlements and 600 prisoners of war. So the first stage is leverage. The second stage is deciding Ukraine's place in the world security infrastructure. Well, those are Zelensky's words. But what do they mean? Maybe security guarantees from the West, or a promise of neutrality, or even a NATO membership. We don't know. It is vague by design. The third stage is forcing Russia to end the war diplomatically. And this is very important. After the invasion, Zelensky talked about defeating Russia. He said, give me the weapons and I'll beat Putin. But now he says, end the war diplomatically. Again, no specifics, which brings us to the final stage, that is the economic package. I'm guessing this means rebuilding after the war or joining the European Union market. Now, Zelensky's statements made a couple of things quite clear. A, this won't be possible without US support. And B, it could take a while. Why else would he brief both Kamala Harris and Donald Trump? But let's assume that they're on board. Will it be enough for the plan to succeed if the Americans are on board? Russia has already rejected the plan. They say the war will continue. But there is one good thing about this plan, an acceptance that talks are the only way out. Zelensky was pretty clear about it.
І якщо вони знають хоч щось про наші дії,
We must, on our platform at the Peace Summit, be in powerful position, strong position. Of course, it will be over in the way of dialogue, but we must have strong position in the dialogue.
на нашій платформі, на саміті миру, бути в потужній ситуації.
So Zelensky is betting on dialogue. But to succeed at the negotiating table, you need leverage. Does Kiev have that? They claim to control around 1,300 square kilometers of Russian territory. Now, to give you some context, Russia's total size is 17 million square kilometers. Kiev controls 1,300. So it controls 0.007% of Russia. But Russia controls nearly 18% of Ukraine. Now, I'm not a negotiating expert, but those do not look like good numbers. So Kursk alone cannot help Ukraine. They need to do better, and for that, they will need Western help. Zelensky is asking for long-range cruise missiles. He wants to hit deep inside Russia. But Moscow has warned against it. Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov issued a threat yesterday.
This is blackmail. This is an attempt to pretend that the West wants to avoid excessive escalation, but in reality it is deceit. The West does not want to avoid escalation. The West, as they say, is asking for it. We have our own doctrine, including the doctrine of using nuclear weapons, which, by the way, is now being clarified and which American officials know very well.
This is why the West is wary. They don't mind attacks inside Russia, but they don't want their weapons involved. So what is Zelensky doing about that? He's building his own long-range missiles. It's called Palyanitsia. The word itself refers to a type of Ukrainian bread. Apparently, the Russians have a hard time pronouncing it. This weapon is homegrown. It's a combination of a missile and a drone, and it can strike deep inside Russia. But the exact range is not clear yet. If deployed, it could strengthen Kiev's hand, maybe put Russia under more pressure. But still, there is no guarantee of success, because Russia is a nuclear power and Ukraine is not. No incursion or missile can bridge that gulf, meaning Moscow will always have the upper hand in talks. Zelensky is simply not willing to accept that. It's good that he's focusing on dialogue, but that dialogue must be rooted in battleground realities. If not, it will be a repeat of what we saw in Switzerland, a peace summit with no peace. Is the Maldives drifting towards political instability? Is there an attempt to overthrow the Muizu government? We ask because of some recent developments in Mali. There are worrying signs and warnings from both the government and the opposition. They say attempts are being made to topple the government. And it began with President Muizu himself. He said someone is trying to overthrow his government. Now, coming from the president, this is a pretty serious allegation. So who was behind this? Was it the military? Was it someone from the opposition? Or was it an insider? Well, Muizu is pointing fingers at a bank, the Bank of Maldives, one of the largest banks of this country. Muizu says this bank tried to stage a quote-unquote financial coup, and the opposition is pulling the strings from behind. The crisis began over the weekend. Cards from the Bank of Maldives suddenly stopped working. The bank suspended foreign transactions. It also lowered credit limits of customers. Basically, their debit and credit cards became useless overnight. So most international payments were blocked, and online foreign transactions were also affected. The bank imposed a cap on them. Do you know how much? $100 per month. That's the cap. $100 a month in foreign transactions online. That is next to nothing, especially if you're living in the Maldives, where the economy practically runs on the US dollar. Maldivians heavily rely on the greenback. The tourism industry has most of its transactions in the US dollar. It is more widely accepted than the Maldivian rupiah. And that's not all. Maldivians also pay for tuition, healthcare, and other expenses using the US dollar. So killing foreign transactions could cause serious disruptions and a lot of panic. Then why did the Bank of Maldives do it? The bank says it had no choice. It was unable to keep up with the demand. This year, it bought $60 million worth of foreign exchange, but the transactions were 3 times higher than this amount. So setting a cap was necessary. But Muizu is challenging this claim. He says the bank had sinister motives and that some directors of the Bank of Maldives support the opposition. So they introduced these curbs just to destabilize his government. In fact, I have a quote from Muizu himself. This is what he said. There is room to believe that this cap on spending was an illegal attempt to overthrow a legitimate government. An investigation has now been launched. Meanwhile, the bank has reversed the curbs on foreign transactions. This was after an intervention from the government. So is there any merit to Muizu's claims? The MDP, for one, is calling them ridiculous. The MDP is the Maldivian Democratic Party. They were in power before Muizu's rise. Now they are the biggest opposition party in the country. The MDP says Muizu's claims are a distraction and that there is trouble brewing within the government. Look at their statement. This is the opposition statement. What we see are fault lines within the administration, that there is trouble brewing within. And we see a coup coming from within in the days ahead. So the MDP agrees that Muizu could face a coup, but not from a bank or the opposition. They say his own government could turn against him, which makes one thing pretty clear. Irrespective of who the instigator is, there is trouble brewing in Mali. The government faces a threat. The economy is already on shaky ground. Mali's finances are in disarray. Credit agencies have downgraded the debt of the Maldives. Fitch has classified it as junk. Plus, foreign reserves are under stress. In the month of June, the Maldives had just 1 month of foreign reserves left. A few days ago, claims like these went viral. A news outlet said that Mali had run out of money and its foreign reserves were in the negative territory. The Muizu government denied this report. But it's hard to ignore the fact that the Maldives is showing signs of financial distress. The IMF, for one, has warned them. That's the International Monetary Fund. They say, and I'm quoting, they say the Maldives is at high risk of external and overall debt distress. That's the assessment of the International Monetary Fund. The last thing they need is political instability. And the Maldives has a history of coup attempts. There have been at least 3 attempts to overthrow the government in the past, in 1980, 1983, and 1988. Maumoon Abdul Gayoom was in power then. The first 2 attempts were not significant, but in 1988, Gayoom faced a serious challenge. A businessman tried to overthrow him with the help of Sri Lankan mercenaries. Gayoom turned to India for help. And that is when New Delhi launched Operation Cactus. It deployed troops from all 3 services, the Army, the Navy, and the Air Force, to the Maldives. India sent troops from all these services. The Indian soldiers crushed the coup attempt. But that was in the 1980s. Today, the circumstances are very different. The relationship with India is very different. Both the ruling and the opposition parties are warning about a possible coup. And this should be a cause for alarm. Now let's talk about Myanmar. The conflict between the junta and the rebels is escalating, and that's making Beijing nervous. This week, China launched a military drill. It is happening along its border with Myanmar, and this is a live fire exercise, meaning Chinese troops are using live ammunition for these drills. Both ground and air force units of the PLA, the People's Liberation Army, the Chinese army, are participating. This may sound like a routine military exercise, but it is not. China is making a statement with these drills. It is sending a message to Myanmar's military junta. Less than 2 weeks ago, Wang Yi was in Naypyidaw, the capital of Myanmar. Wang Yi is the foreign minister of China. He spoke to the military leadership of Myanmar. He wants them to strike a deal with the rebels. China wants a ceasefire in Myanmar.
China is willing to work with all parties to make a common voice in ending the conflict in Myanmar, maintaining stability, ensuring people's security.
Beijing is getting impatient with the junta. In January this year, they had brokered a ceasefire, but it fell apart by June. Since then, the military has been reluctant to strike another deal. There are signs of tension between the junta and Beijing. This month, Myanmar's military chief made a big claim. His name is Min Aung Hlaing, and he is the country's de facto leader. The general delivered a 25-minute-long speech, and he said, and I'm quoting, "Certain foreign countries are arming the rebels." The general did not name China, but his statement was clearly aimed at Beijing, and it became obvious when Wang Yi issued a rebuttal. During his visit to Myanmar, he warned the general. He said, and I'm quoting, "China opposes any remarks that attempt to sow discord in China-Myanmar relations or smear and vilify China." These remarks were made behind closed doors, but China's embassy in Naypyidaw made them public. So there is clear friction between Beijing and the junta. The offensive by the rebels is adding more tension. The rebels now control 2/3 of Myanmar. This includes the guard posts for Chinese oil and gas pipelines. This is in the Mandalay region. These pipelines run from Rakhine to China's Yunnan province, Rakhine in Myanmar to China's Yunnan province. So in a way, the rebels now control key energy infrastructure that the Chinese rely on. And the junta's response is making the situation worse. A sweeping military campaign is underway. The junta has deployed warplanes and artillery to hit back at the rebels. They want to take back the border areas. This has created a new problem for China. The fighting on the border is spilling over. It has damaged property on the Chinese side. Chinese citizens have been injured. Beijing views this escalation as a matter of deep concern. It believes that if the fighting continues like this, it could threaten more Chinese infrastructure projects. As a result, the PLA is now conducting patrols in the border areas. This also explains why Beijing needs the ceasefire. The fighting is hurting Chinese citizens, Chinese infrastructure, and Chinese interests. Today, the junta gave in to one of China's demands. It has promised to hold elections next year. They'll hold elections, but in a staggered manner. Now, in the past, India too has supported the idea of elections because they may offer a path to stability. But the problem is the junta has made similar promises before. Aung San Suu Kyi was ousted in 2021 in the February coup. Since then, the military leaders have made several promises to hold elections and broken all of them. So China will have to sustain the pressure for them to deliver. And it won't be easy because China's mediation in Myanmar has already backfired. It now has a bigger problem on its hand. Our next story is about yet another Indian neighbor, this time the most fiscally irresponsible one. Yes, I'm talking about Pakistan. After years of financial mismanagement, Islamabad seems to have finally woken up. It is now tightening the belt with a raft of new austerity measures. Yesterday, Pakistan's cabinet held a meeting where they agreed to abolish or merge 82 government departments under 6 different ministries. The ministries were not specified, but earlier reports suggest that they include the following: the Ministry of Kashmir Affairs and Gilgit-Baltistan, the Ministry of States and Frontier Regions, the Information Technology and Telecommunications Ministry, the Industries and Production Ministry, the Health Ministry, and possibly the Education Ministry. Departments in all these ministries are heading for the chopping block. This means a reduction of government expenditure. And that's not all. There are some 150,000 vacant positions in the Pakistani government, 150,000. Islamabad plans to do away with them entirely. It also plans to outsource non-core functions like cleaning services. And that's just to begin with. Eventually, Pakistan wants to do away with clerical jobs as well. It wants government officers to embrace artificial intelligence so they don't have to rely on staff for paperwork. It is an ambitious plan, and it's been approved by Pakistan's cabinet. But there's already political opposition to this from within the ruling coalition, so let's see if they really go through with it. Some austerity measures have been proposed as well, like a ban on purchase of vehicles at public expense and an end to unnecessary foreign trips by government officials. All of this sounds good until you remember that the government itself will decide what is necessary and what is not. But even if the plan is not foolproof, on paper, it looks like Pakistan is tightening the belt. Which brings us to the big question, why now? What made Islamabad suddenly realize the dire situation? Well, there are two factors. One is public anger. Businesses across Pakistan were on strike today. They were protesting against additional taxes. Islamabad's go-to move over the years has been to bleed the people dry. The government usually passed the financial burden to the citizens. But the people of Pakistan seem to have had enough. They're fed up with all the extra new taxes. Protests keep erupting, so the government now knows that it has to contribute as well. And that is why Islamabad is finally starting to cut the fat. This is one reason for the new austerity measures. The other reason is the real dearth of money. Islamabad wants to borrow about $20 billion from external lenders this year. $20 billion this year. Old habits die hard after all. It comes to about $1.6 billion per month. In July, they managed to borrow only a little more than $400 million. That's well short of their target. What's worse is that Islamabad's piggy bank, the International Monetary Fund, is not helping immediately. The IMF won't be giving Pakistan its pocket money till next month, and it gets worse. Pakistan's other credit cards, China, Saudi Arabia and the UAE, are also ignoring it. Forget new loans, these countries are not even agreeing to roll over existing debt. And that would be a big blow to Islamabad. It needs that debt rolled over for the next IMF allowance. It needs to show some money in the bank to get the next IMF loan. So what is Islamabad doing about this? Well, two things. One, they're looking at different lenders, including commercial banks. Islamabad is in talks with the Dubai Islamic Bank and the Mashreq Bank, among others. It is trying to convince them of potential investment opportunities in Pakistan. Let's see if the banks decide the risk is worth it. Meanwhile, Pakistan is also reaching out to its old friends like China. The commander of the Chinese Army's ground force, General Li Qiaoming, was in Pakistan over the last few days. He was first greeted by the country's real leader, that is Pakistan's Chief of Army Staff, General Asim Munir. The two met in Rawalpindi on Monday. Then yesterday, the Chinese general met Pakistan's President and Prime Minister. General Li was given Pakistan's second highest civilian honor, the Nishan-e-Imtiaz. It seems Islamabad is doing everything it can to curry favor with Beijing. It really needs that debt rollover, and I'm sure another billion or two would also be welcome. But until that happens, until Pakistan's finances are shored up, expect more austerity measures. Whether Islamabad actually adheres to them is a whole different story, though. Let's turn to France now. There's a bitter political deadlock in the country. In the month of June, French President Emmanuel Macron dissolved the parliament. He called for snap elections. In July, the results were out. The left won the most seats. Macron's centrist party came second. Since then, the country has been without a government. Now, usually the president names a prime minister from the biggest faction. In this case, that's the left parties. But President Macron has rejected their prime ministerial choice. He says the left wouldn't win a confidence vote, and that would lead to, quote-unquote, institutional instability. The left has called it an unacceptable anti-democratic coup. They're planning a huge protest, and they want to impeach President Macron. Will this plunge France into chaos? Our next report tells you.
In July, the left in France thought they had scored a huge victory. They were fighting under the new Popular Front, the Socialists, the Greens and the Communists. So it's quite a diverse bunch. These parties don't have a lot in common, but they came together to keep Marine Le Pen's national rally out of government. And in the end, they succeeded. They came out on top in the snap presidential polls. But there's a problem. France's National Assembly has 577 seats. No group has got the majority mark. The left-wing coalition got 187 seats. Macron's Ensemble Alliance won 159. And far-right National Rally and its allies have 142. So no one has enough seats to govern on their own. And it has led to a political impasse. Usually the president names a prime minister from the biggest faction. So the left came up with a candidate. It was Lucie Castex. She is a Paris civil servant. The left says she should be named prime minister. But Macron has rejected this choice. The left may be the biggest group, but he's not legally obligated to choose from them. On Monday, Macron held talks with his own alliance and Marine Le Pen's far-right National Rally. They made it clear they don't support the left's choice. So if Macron endorsed their choice, the government would still lose the confidence vote. It wouldn't be able to function. That's why he blocked it. This hasn't gone down too well with the left. They called it an anti-democratic coup. They have also called for a huge demonstration on September 7th. So chances of chaos in the days to come are quite high.
I have the impression that we're facing successive rejections from everyone, but at some point we have to put things together, and I don't think we're there yet, even though 2 months have gone by now.
From the outset, it is assumed that the majority will form the government. Normally, that's a form of logic. Well, I have the impression that nothing can suit President Emmanuel Macron today.
So what happens next? Macron says he will restart talks with all party leaders to reach an agreement. Meanwhile, the left seems to have taken a page out of Donald Trump's playbook. They say the election is being stolen. The New Popular Front wants to impeach Macron. They accuse him of trying to prolong Macronism. Now, an impeachment is unlikely, but France still doesn't have a prime minister. A caretaker government is calling all the shots right now. Technically, there's no deadline to choose a prime minister. But France needs to present its budget on the 1st of October. That deadline is fast approaching. If a new prime minister is not selected by then, France will be wading into uncharted territory.
The chaos continues in West Bengal. Yesterday, it was a police crackdown. Today, it was a general strike, a Bengal Bandh. The strike was called by the state's main opposition party, the BJP. But the ruling party, the TMC, opposed it. You can imagine what happened next, a showdown. Party workers clashed in different parts of the state. Take a look. Some BJP leaders have been detained, including a sitting Rajya Sabha MP, a former state president and a former Lok Sabha MP. The strike itself drew a mixed response today. It lasted for 12 hours from 6 a.m. to 6 in the evening. Roads were certainly less crowded than usual, but most establishments were open, including shops, schools and colleges. Some train and bus services were also disrupted, but nothing on a large scale, which brings us to the trigger of this chaos. A student group had taken out a protest march yesterday, but Kolkata police called it illegal. They used tear gas and water cannons to push back. Reports say around 200 people were arrested. A lot of them were also injured. So the BJP called for a strike to protest the police crackdown. But these street showdowns are very dangerous. They lead to violence and bloodshed. We nearly saw an example today. A BJP leader was travelling in his car near Kolkata. A gunman suddenly came out of nowhere and fired at the car. Take a look at this now. We could not verify this video, but the leader has spoken out since then, and he says the gunman was a TMC supporter. Apparently, they also threw bombs at his cars. Some of his supporters had to be admitted to a nearby hospital. Now, let's be clear, there is a partisan angle to these protests, which is why doctors have not joined in. They're not part of this protest. They held a different rally today. But that doesn't mean the public is not angry. There is genuine anger against the West Bengal government here, against the Kolkata police, whether it's allegations of a cover-up or the delay in filing a case or tear-gassing students. You cannot brush that under the carpet. Today, Chief Minister Mamata Banerjee addressed a rally. She said the protests are an attempt to defame Bengal. She also said that if Bengal burns, then Assam, Bihar and Delhi will also burn.
মোদি বাবু আপনার পার্টিকে দিয়ে আগুন লাগাচ্ছেন মনে রাখবেন বাংলায় যদি আগুন লাগান আসামও থেমে থাকবে না নর্থ ইস্টও থেমে থাকবে না উত্তর প্রদেশও থেমে থাকবে না বিহারও থেমে থাকবে না ঝাড়খণ্ড থেমে থাকবে না উড়িষ্যাও থেমে থাকবে না আর দিল্লিও থেমে থাকবে না আপনার চেয়ারটা আমরা টলমল করে দেব
Such comments are dangerous. They don't address the problem. Instead, they add fuel to the fire. And while these leaders played politics, the problem remained unsolved. The Kolkata rape and murder happened on the 9th of August. Look at what's happened since then. 3 men were arrested for gang raping a teenager in Madhya Pradesh. In Kanpur, an 8-year-old was molested by a cleric. In Kota, a 13-year-old was raped inside her home. In Badlapur, a man raped his 16-year-old daughter. And in Jodhpur, a 14-year-old was gang raped at a hospital. Again, a government-run hospital. These are just a handful of cases since August 9th. India reports a rape case every 16 minutes. What has been done to change that? The conversation has veered away from solutions. It is now about strikes and crackdowns and street violence. This is what we need to change. Yes, we need accountability, but we also need improvements. Concrete solutions on how to protect women. Even President Draupadi Murmu broke her silence on this. She said, enough is enough, that the nation must deal with these crimes in a comprehensive manner. Unfortunately, we're not seeing any of that. No political party has come up with new ideas or a new proposal on women's safety. All we are seeing is outrage, mostly to gain political mileage. And I am afraid that is part of the problem. Political parties think outrage will get them public support. But do you know what will actually make them popular? Fixing the problem. The year was 2017. It was the month of February. A Malayalam actress was traveling by her car. A group of men rammed into her car. They kidnapped her. They sexually assaulted her. The assault was recorded. And then after 2 hours, they dropped her off. All of this happened in Kochi, a city in the state of Kerala. It's also where the Malayalam film industry or Mollywood is based. After the assault, the woman filed an FIR. 2 of the assaulters were arrested. The investigation then unveiled a bigger plot. These men were hired by an actor called Dilip. He's one of Malayalam film industry's biggest actors. He hired the assaulters and paid them because he wanted to silence the actress. This revelation led to shockwaves across Kerala. A judicial committee was formed to investigate the rot. It was called the Hema Committee after Justice Hema, who led it. They looked into harassment and sexual extortion in Mollywood, and their report was ready in 2019, but it's been released only now after another legal battle. This report details sexual exploitation, the casting couch, and a male mafia in the film industry. But what about the case that started it all? That case is still under trial from 2017 to 2024 and counting. Yesterday, the Supreme Court of India brought it up. It sought information from the Kerala government. 7 years and the trial is still on. Imagine that. And this is a high-profile case, one that exposed the dark side of Mollywood that led to the Hema Committee report and the current Me Too movement in Kerala. That case still lingers. The woman has still not got justice. It is this endless, often fruitless legal battle that deters people, that prevents women from seeking justice. But for a change, after a long silence, actresses in the Malayalam film industry are speaking up. Take Meenu Munir, for example. She has accused 4 actors. She says one of them hugged her without consent. He even tried to kiss her forcefully. Others made advances. They told her she would get better opportunities if she slept with them. And when she refused, she lost roles. Even after speaking out, she's been threatened. Another actress has accused Siddiq. He is a Malayalam cinema veteran. This actress says that he raped her when she was 21. He promised her a role in a movie. They met in a hotel where he was staying. He locked her in a room and ended up raping her. And she came out with the story in 2017, but no one believed her then. So now she's repeating it. And Siddiq is facing the music. Then there's another top filmmaker called Ranjit. He's been accused of molestation. So big names are being held to account finally, and there's a political fallout too. One top actor happens to be a CPIM MLA. He's been accused of harassment, so he's been dropped from a film body panel. The Kerala police has filed 17 cases so far. More are expected in the coming days, and the pressure is mounting. The Kerala Chief Minister held a high-level meeting with senior police officials. They formed an SIT, a special investigation team. It includes 4 senior women police officers who will look into more cases and allegations. So action is finally being taken, but the question is, what took so long? And why were these women silent? Some of them are well-known actresses. They were influential, even relatively powerful, on top of their game. They'd carved out a space in their industry. Why could they not speak up? And when they did, when some of them did, why were they met with silence? How powerful does a woman have to be safe? How powerful does a woman have to be for crimes against her to be acknowledged? And if the so-called successful actresses meet this fate, imagine what happens to the junior artists. And it's not just physical harassment, which is bad enough. It's mental harassment too. You don't get roles. Sometimes you're not given a place to sit. Toilet facilities are missing. There are no changing rooms. All of this takes a huge toll. Look at the 2017 assault again. The actress was a famous one. She's acted in more than 90 films. She spoke out. She registered an FIR, yet it changed nothing. It shows you how skewed the power dynamics are, and that perhaps is why nothing really changes. All the power rests in the hands of a few men. They call the shots, they abuse women, and they shield other abusers. This is what Mollywood should try to dismantle. We need women in positions of power so that the heroines on screen do not end up as victims in real life. Now let's turn our attention to Mexico. Their president is Andrés Manuel López Obrador, more commonly called AMLO. He made an announcement yesterday. He said Mexico is pausing its relationship with 2 embassies, the US Embassy and the Canadian one. Now, AMLO is furious with the American ambassador for his comments regarding Mexico's judicial reform. The president wants to scrap the usual merit-based system of appointing judges. Instead, he wants people to directly elect judges, making it a popularity contest. This proposal has drawn criticism from within the country and from the American and Canadian ambassadors. But AMLO is not having that. He has slammed both these ambassadors and paused ties with the 2 embassies. Here's our report.
How are we going to allow the U.S. Ambassador Ken Salazar to give his opinion? To say what we're doing is wrong.
How is the relationship with Salazar right now, Mr. President?
It's good, but it is on pause.
A pause means he can't come anymore.
A pause means we'll take some time.
That was Mexico's president, Andrés Manuel López Obrador. Yesterday, he expressed his displeasure with the U.S. ambassador to the country, Ken Salazar. Salazar stirred up a hornet's nest last week. He criticized the Mexican government's proposed judicial reform. The reform is certainly contentious. It has led to protests in the country. Members of the Mexican judiciary have taken to the streets.
We are on strike. I am a sitting judge due to a reform that is intended to be carried out within the judiciary. They intend to somehow dismember the federal judiciary by having judges and magistrates elected by popular vote.
No matter how good their intentions may be, the most popular person is not necessarily the best one to solve the problem as a judge.
Judicial appointments by direct voting does pose risks. The judiciary and Mexico's public have been highlighting the issues. They've been marching for days. And last week, the US ambassador decided to add his 2 cents.
I think the direct election of judges represents a risk to the functioning of the democracy in Mexico and the integration of the US, Mexican, and Canadian economies. Direct elections of judges could also make it easier for cartels and other bad actors to take advantage of inexperienced judges with political motivations.
His points seem fair, but López Obrador was not impressed. He saw it as American interference in Mexico's domestic issues.
They have to learn to respect Mexico's sovereignty. That's no small thing. We're not going to give them advice over there.
So what does this mean for the US-Mexico bilateral relationship? Well, nothing seems to have changed yet. López Obrador says that the pause in ties is with the embassy, with Ambassador Salazar, not with the US itself. But it's unlikely that López Obrador is thrilled with Washington either. The quip about respecting Mexico's sovereignty seems to have been directed at the US, not just Salazar. But while López Obrador is still being cautious with the US, he couldn't help but express his disdain for Canada.
What a coincidence that the Canadian embassy also says something at the same time. Respectfully with the Canadian government, it gives me second-hand embarrassment. They seem like a partner state.
He has paused ties with the Canadian embassy as well. After López Obrador's outburst yesterday, the US released a statement. They reiterated their utmost respect for Mexico's sovereignty. The US had sent this statement to the Mexican government last week itself. But they made it public yesterday, probably to mitigate criticism. Will this help cool tensions? Probably not. The only way for that to happen is if the US takes a step back and lets Mexico deal with its own problems.
A major World Cup has just wrapped up in Saudi Arabia. Not your football or hockey World Cup. This was a gaming World Cup. That's right, a World Cup for esports. And before you dismiss it as a gimmick, listen to the numbers. The tournament had 21 gaming events, more than 1,500 players, more than 200 gaming clubs, nearly 500 million viewers, and $60 million in prize money. Let that sink in. The Wimbledon prize pool is $66 million. The Cricket World Cup had $10 million and esports had $60 million. It tells you how big this industry is. This was the first ever esports World Cup, and there are Saudi fingerprints all over it. The tournament was held in Riyadh. It was funded by the Saudi Investment Fund, and it was won by a Saudi team. In fact, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman attended the closing ceremony. He handed over the big prize himself. Now, Riyadh's motives are quite clear. It wants to become a sporting hub in West Asia, whether it's for football or esports. This World Cup brought 2 million visitors to the kingdom. Tourist arrivals were up 29%, so it's job done for Riyadh. But tonight we're looking at the larger story. How big is the world of esports? How is it growing? And what role does India play? But before that, some basics. How exactly do you compete in these games? Don't you play against a computer? Well, not always. Games at esports events are multiplayer, meaning you play against another gamer. Now, Saudi Arabia had 21 such games like Call of Duty, FC Football, Counter-Strike, Fortnite and PUBG. If you beat your opponent, you advance to the next round, much like tennis or badminton. Gaming is among the fastest growing industries in the world, by the way. It was worth $250 billion in 2022. It is projected to reach $665 billion by the end of this decade. Around 3.2 billion people play video games. Almost 1 billion play online. Of course, most of these are casual gamers. Professional gamers are still few. The industry's biggest challenge is attitude. Gaming is usually considered a pastime. You don't associate video games with skill. But that attitude is slowly changing. Even the International Olympic Committee is jumping in. They cannot include esports in the Olympics because Olympic sports require physical skills. So they're launching a separate event, an Olympic esports. The first edition will be held next year, and no prizes for guessing where. In Saudi Arabia. So gamers will soon be Olympians. What explains this sudden rush for esports? Well, gaming companies are making billions of dollars. They also employ hundreds of skilled engineers and designers, plus it's a matter of prestige. Have you heard of GTA or Grand Theft Auto? It's a game series with a number of titles, all of them set in fictional American cities. Millions of young children play this game growing up. Similarly, Japan has Ghost of Tsushima, a game about samurais. And this month, a Chinese company released a new game, Black Myth, based on a Chinese novel. So video games can be a soft power tool like books or movies. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi talked about it recently. He said India should become a gaming hub.
भारत के पास बहुत बड़ी विरासत है. हम गेमिंग की दुनिया में बहुत नई टैलेंट को लेकर के आ सकते हैं. विश्व के हर बच्चे को हमारे देश के बनी हुई गेमिंग की ओर आकर्षित कर सकते हैं. मैं चाहता हूं कि भारत के बच्चे, भारत के नौजवान वे गेमिंग की दुनिया को लीड करें.
In April, Prime Minister Modi also met India's top gamers. He even tried his hand at some of the games. Again, the idea was quite clear, to give a push to India's gaming industry. And we certainly have the tools. A surplus of engineers and designers, a young population of prospective gamers, plus unique stories to build a game around. Yet the industry is underdeveloped. The Indian gaming sector is worth $3 billion. Reports say there are 18,000 game developers in the country, but most of them focus on small games, mostly those played on mobile phones. The question then is, what can be done about this? Well, attitude change is obvious. The stigma around gaming must be removed. It's not always a waste of time. It can be a career path too. Secondly, we need investments because big games take a lot of money. Consider the upcoming GTA 6 game. It reportedly had a budget of $2 billion. And third, more clarity on taxation. India has clubbed skill-based games with gambling and casinos. Online games attract a 28% GST. It's an obvious way to spook developers. They have protested this high tax rate, and the issue is now being heard by the Supreme Court of India. So India is well placed to capitalize on the gaming boom. But it has a lot of ground to cover, and this is a rapidly growing market. So if you don't act fast, it is game over. We want you to picture something. Imagine walking into a room full of friends. How do you feel? Surely warm and fuzzy. Now flip this scenario. You walk into the same room, but this time your friends do not want to include you. How do you feel now? Not good, we imagine. This hypothetical scenario comes from a study. Participants were asked these questions. While they imagined the scenarios, researchers took their brain scans. And here's what they found. The two scans were completely different. During the second scenario, where the subjects felt left out, their brains got a negative signal. This activated pain responses. And why are we telling you this? Not to rehash painful memories of middle school. This study shows what the lack of social connection, what loneliness does to us. While it may not seem that way, despite the taboo, loneliness is a biological issue and it can be painful. It is a gap in social connection, the gap between the level of connectedness that you want and what you have. Think of loneliness like hunger. No one likes a rumbling stomach, especially when it sounds like a newly awakened beast. But hunger is important. And what hunger does for food, loneliness does for social relationships. It works like a motivator, telling us when we need more support. And much like persistent hunger, regularly feeling lonely is a big problem. Globally, 33% of adults are said to be lonely. Half of Brazil is lonely, followed by Turkey, India, Saudi Arabia, and Italy. But the problem is not limited to these countries, of course. The World Health Organization calls loneliness a global public health concern. It is as deadly as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. It increases the risk of early death by 39%. It is undisputed that loneliness is a deadly problem, so why don't we have a solution for it? Because we focus on quick fixes. Last year, the US Surgeon General issued an advisory. He said participate in in-person activities like volunteering or sports. Japan, where about 90,000 people are expected to die of loneliness this year, has a minister of loneliness. So does the UK. They also have an initiative for the British Mail Service where carriers check in with residents on their routes. The UK has chatty benches as well. So do Sweden, Ireland, and Australia. These are park benches where strangers can talk to each other. So different countries have different solutions. Yet, there is a loneliness epidemic. And why is that? Because we are looking at it wrong. First, loneliness is a multi-dimensional emotion. It has elements of sadness, pain, anxiety, and fear, and it is subjective. Some lonely people may see the chatty bench as an opportunity, but others may fear it. So it's not that simple. Secondly, where does the onus lie? Because this is not just a personal problem, it's also a policy issue. You see, it works like a self-fulfilling prophecy. The lesser time you spend with people, the lonelier you get, and the lesser you want to be around people. It's like a vicious cycle. So yes, people should forge connections, and governments are not wrong in urging this, but doing just that will not help. It hasn't helped. We live in the age of social media, in the age of wars and pandemics, falling belief in religion, falling marriage and birth rates, and shrinking families. So how we communicate has also changed. We are not all going to join a running club or talk to strangers in parks, and our children may not grow up around our parents. Social connections do not work like they used to. So all we can do is adapt. We can reach out to more people via video calls, or we can hold meetings over Zoom calls, but occasionally meet for a team lunch in person. We basically need realistic solutions, surely on a personal level, but about time our governments get with the program too. The South Yorkshire police are making headlines. Do you know why? Because of a tweet. It asks people to report quote-unquote untouchables. And who are they? Well, these are people who have a lavish lifestyle, yet they don't seem to have a job. No one knows the source of their wealth. So the police wanted citizens to report such people. The campaign sparked public interest. There were multiple reports, and all of them pointed at a group that seemed to fit the description perfectly. The UK royal family, well, they attend fancy parties, they wear big jewels. They have multiple properties, yet people have never seen them get on a Zoom call. Looks like it's time for King Charles to update his LinkedIn. After all, he has to prove that being a professional ribbon cutter is a legitimate career.
Emotional damage.
Is it September the 12th?
13th, sir.
Oh God, it was the wrong date. 13th?
Yes, sir.
You saw the 12th earlier.
Where did I put the 12th? I saw the 10th. Oh God, I hate this.
Oh look, it's going everywhere. Hang on. So nobody got a job.
Where's the man? Whenever it's safe, come up there, this bloody thing. Everyone's stinking.
And now it's time for Vantage shots, images that tell the story. Lightning strikes Mecca's clock tower, creating a dramatic effect in Saudi Arabia. The Chinese space station reveals a spectacular view of the Earth. And the Mexican Navy seizes over 7 tons of drugs in a high-speed Pacific chase. Finally, we're taking you back in history. On this day in 1963, Martin Luther King Jr. gave his iconic speech, "I Have a Dream." He was one of the most prominent leaders of the civil rights movement in the United States. In the speech, he said he imagined a future without racism. Leaving you on that note, thank you for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.
Demonstrations where there is a real compliance with the 1964 bill and with the
Across continents, one powerful news source.
Bringing you diverse perspectives on the issues that matter.
We go beyond the boundaries to give you that little extra about every sporting moment.
So thank you for making Firstpost 5 million strong. We're counting on your support, and you can trust us to bring you the news unfiltered and unvarnished.
Climate change is on our doorstep. It's time for a revolution to take root. And it starts with 1.4 billion Indians. It starts with one tree. One tree for humanity. One tree for Mother Earth. One tree for our future. Project One Tree, a News 18 network initiative.
On the show today, the T20 World Cup bandwagon has moved across to the West Indies. What can you expect from this?
Hello, I'm Alison Green, coming to you from Durban, South Africa. Today we have a special show.
Start with a report on India's shifting nuclear posture. The first time since India officially became a nuclear power.
Hello and welcome to Firstpost America. I'm Aaron Ham, coming to you live from the nation's capital, Washington, D.C.